So what we do on Let Us Explain is dive deep on something that we can't stop thinking about for other people who can't stop thinking about that thing too. That means we'll be talking about anything and everything. Sometimes that includes spoilers, but before we jump into the spoiler zone, let's talk more generally about Downhill and Force Majeure. I am your co-host, Zachary Shevich, and joining me, he's vacationed at the Ibiza of the Alps. It's Arturo Zurita.
Thank you, Zach. I see y'all have your Downhill merch. I don't know why the hell y'all do. I think y'all want it, but I got the limited edition Force Majeure never released beanie cap that I will not be wearing because it's way too damn here. Explain yourselves and how you guys got Downhill merch from Sundance.
Well, I'm not the only one in a Downhill beanie. Also joining us is Fernando. Say what up, Fernando.
What's up? Yeah, so the story here is that Downhill was kind enough to have its own little like booth like lounge thing at Sundance. They have a bunch of those, for the different sponsors. Yeah. So not only did Downhill give us a movie, but they also gave out like free beanies, what else? They gave out
there was like coffee and phone charge stations.
Phone chargers,
like
portable chargers.
Did they have copies of Force Majeure to release the? No? Okay.
That'd have been nice.
That would have been dope. That would have been kind of great. One time I went to a Now You See Me screening for the second one, and they gave out copies of the first one. I was like, let's go.
So we ended up with a little bit of swag from Downhill from Sundance. Doesn't necessarily reflect on our opinions of the movie.
It does
Ruben
not.
Ostlund's 2014 surgical dissection of the male ego, Force Majeure, gets a broader, uneven, Americanized revision for Downhill, starring Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who also produced this remake and helped shepherd it, as well as Will Ferrell. This is a movie that ideally acts half as a sociological experiment, testing a couple's marriage by forcing them to confront their own shortcomings, and half as a squirm-worthy comedy in which uncomfortable conversations happen in public, humiliating ways. The film's engine is a moment during a ski holiday in which Pete Ferrell flees from a controlled avalanche, leaving his wife, Billy, played by Louis-Dreyfus, and their two young sons fearing for their lives. When the snow is settled, they're left with different interpretations of what happened. Bart, let's start off specifically with Downhill. What are some of the ways in which Downhill does things differently than Force Majeure, and how you felt about those moments?
Well, this one comes from directors Nat Faxon, and I'm blanking on the other dude if you guys have
Jim
him.
Rash. So
both
comedy actors.
Yeah.
I think Jim Rash is probably the more recognizable for his work on Community. But they also co-wrote and directed The Way, Way Back. I think they are Oscar winners for co-writing The Descendants, the
George
Alexander
Clooney
Payne
one,
movie.
yeah. So they've worked on stuff. They got an Oscar to their belt and stuff. We all know them mostly for acting. I think it was who did I say the other one was? Faxon. I like him a lot in Friends from College. They
Jim
tackle
Rash.
this in a very Americanized way. I think you could definitely call it Americanized remake. It definitely takes different strides. Things that it tries to mimic, I'm not the biggest fan of, and I definitely am not a fan of the movie Downhill. I don't love it, but I definitely see what it was trying to do. They switch a lot of things where instead of it being the cringe comedy that the original is, this focuses more on Will Ferrell, not necessarily being a bad father, but he's always so distracted on other things, and they really put an emphasis on the phone here, which I found interesting, and I wish that instead of trying to do something different and then relying back on a lot of scenes from the original and mimicking them that in a best way, that they would have gone all out and really focused on that. They add extra additions to the character of the mom played by Julia. And they even add some elements to the kids that I think you and I were really big fans of because they were able to make them more comedic. But I don't know if you guys have other stuff to add to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that you're honing in on is how much broader the comedy seems in this version of Force Majeure Downhill. There's a lot of sexual comedy that they add in, and I'm not trying to be prude about it, but I just feel like all of it did not work. It's this sort of like cliched trope about like how sexually forward Europeans are, and it's like, sex is just like shaking hands. It doesn't feel it doesn't feel like they're a fish out of water. It feels like they're people talking to people who don't exist. You know, I think it, in many ways, the way that these conversations play out just make me feel stupid as an audience member. And it just, you know, I think it's such a shame coming from this type of source material that it doesn't engage with you or make you think that way. It's just all so much more explicit, from the type of comedy that's in the movie to even their feelings, the way that they articulate how they feel about one another and how they feel in their situation. They spell it out so plainly that I feel like it just kills any sense of realism and any sense of tension that Downhill tries to make. Fernando?
Downhill?
They're going to come for you.
My least favorite movie I've seen so far this year would have been the worst thing I saw at Sundance. Thankfully, I did not see it at Sundance because I knew it was coming out a couple weeks later. It's not a good movie. And I think I will say a majority of my animosity towards it does come because of the fact that force majeure exists. And I don't see any world where anyone would choose to watch this when force majeure is right there to watch. You know, it's on Hulu. You can watch it.
It's on Hulu.
It does way more for the story than Downhill does. And yeah, I just don't see the reason why this was made. It didn't add anything to it. If anything, it took away. And yeah, I pretty much agree with everything you guys say so far. But I'm sure we'll get into it a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of difficult thing about talking about this movie, is that we have this other version, the Ruben Ostlund version, so recent in our memories. The movie came out 5 years ago, did really well. It didn't get nominated for Best Foreign Language Film, but that was like a huge surprise when it did.
And it created one of the greatest reactions of getting snubbed of all time, because he mimicked the cry in the movie when he didn't get nominated for the Oscar. Dope.
I mean, it just... that movie is so present in our memories, and it has such a unique tone to it. I think it works so well in a specific way that it's hard to watch Downhill without force majeure in your mind. I think we're all trying to do our best to talk about what Downhill is on its own. And I think, you know, for people who, because not everybody out there has seen force majeure, and as we've seen from some of the Parasite backlash, not everybody out there is even willing to go see a movie like force majeure, subtitles and all. But, you know, if for someone who is approaching Downhill without that background knowledge, you've got a really interesting premise here. I think that idea of this movie as this kind of like sociological experiment is undeniably engaging, but then they just don't go a lot of interesting places with it. I think there's that one prolonged fight scene, which is another thing that they mimic from force majeure, in which they're visited by friends played by Zach Woods and Zoe Chow, and they have this fight about what actually happened. And while some moments of it are kind of broad and don't work, just that building tension, for me, is the one moment in the movie where you actually get some of the like uncomfortable, unsettling nature that you need from this type of a comedy. The rest of the time, it just kind of doesn't feel lived in, doesn't feel real, doesn't feel like... I think in order for a conflict to matter in a movie, you have to have a sense that something bad is actually going to happen. And they never really sell the idea that this marriage is really in trouble or that their marriage even matters much.
Yeah, and all those subtleties are completely gone. You had mentioned, because they are now Americans visiting a foreign country, whereas the other one, you know, they all spoke the same language. I mean, there were some different languages that would happen because there was different tourists that were coming in, but there's a lot of stuff that wasn't spelled out in where, you know, this is a place where, and I don't know if we're getting into spoilers yet, or if you...
I think we could hold off on spoilers just a little bit.
Just the way that they handle them going into another place where they're all idiots, like you said. It does not feel real. They get greeted by this lady. I'm forgetting who's playing her. But
Miranda Otto plays, I think it's Charlotte.
She is not a bad actress.
No.
So what is going on here when this lady comes out talking? And then I realized it wasn't just her. You realize that her the coaching instructor from later, who's just Fabio. Like, I was just like, do y'all really think anyone who's not American is just this over-sexualized being? And that is insane to think about it. To take an American remake, to take from another country, and then make the people from that country in this movie look like damn idiots is bonkers to me. I don't get it.
Yeah, and even then, when their attempt to make them like goofy and like caricatures, it's not even funny, like we are all expecting the American version with these comedy actors and writers to at least add like this level of funny that Force Majeure can technically classify as a comedy if you look at it, but it's a lot more
cringe comedy.
Yeah, but this one, if they didn't even I didn't even feel like they tried to go like traditional like Hollywood comedy. And if they did, it didn't work at all. Because
it wasn't like nonstop laughs all the time that you might expect
from these two.
A Will Ferrell movie. They did actually try to indulge in the drama, but they did it in this weird way that kind of like tampers down the comedy, doesn't really enhance it.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's ways in which I do think that both Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Will Ferrell are actually doing some decent performing here. Even though the material is not so great, like I buy some of their upset, but you look at a movie like Force Majeure, and I think we can maybe start talking more explicitly about comparisons between the two movies. There's that amazing scene that we mentioned where the husband is crying in the hallway and admitting his shortcomings and his failures, and that just feels like a perfect. Just put Will Ferrell in that exact position. But they do the hallway scene, and he never gets to the point where he's crying and humiliating himself. Yeah. They play it so straight for drama, not for laughs, and it just feels like all these weirdly missed opportunities that I don't know what they're even thinking in those moments.
And there's some stuff, like you were saying, a lot of people who may be going to go see Downhill, which, interestingly enough, was only playing in one theater near me. There's a movie.
It was a much more limited release than I was expecting.
Very limited, yeah. It was one of those Sundance movies. Like I always tell the boys, I was like, don't watch anything coming out the following month, because those definitely feel, because it was this being a premiere, it's something where it's like, throw Sundance a little money just so you can say you were a Sundance premiere. Critics weren't buying that, and critics do not buy those fake buyouts every year. If you're buying your movie in, and we know you're buying it in, because how's that merch feel? Comfortable? Is it good? They're there for business. And it's just very weird to see how limited it's gotten, but it's gotten an artisan AMC slate on it. Even though Photograph is out, that Black love story that came out during Valentine's Day, that's more of an independent movie, that doesn't have that. This movie does. Might as well just give it to Sonic at that point. But if we're talking about comparisons, I thought you brought up, then we should start just with the initial one right off the bat, because the movie does a lot of callbacks. That's really weird, considering the people who do love Force Majeure, the only ones who would know the callbacks. For example, the stickers. She starts putting a lot of stickers on the helmet, because in the original, there's something that takes him off, and that's the sticker of a chicken that he starts seeing too much into, because he feels that that's what his family is calling him when he gets locked out of his room. That scene doesn't happen, so what the hell was the point of the stickers? They end up making it a joke for Will Ferrell not wanting to wear his helmet and wear something over it, but it's a lot of those stuff where they're trying to force in scenes from the original to fit into this narrative, but it doesn't work. The worst part is I found the characters to be unlikable. They add a lot of elements to these characters that are very unlikable.
Yeah.
The argument with, and I'm blanking on his name, but Tormund, when he comes in, not to play his original character, but to play like an employee, the manager, she literally pulls I need to speak to the manager. And you lose all of that, everything that the actress in the original had, Julia don't have it here.
Yeah, you definitely sympathize a lot more for their situation. I think you sympathize for both characters a lot more in Force Majeure, because they're put into a really uncomfortable position. And even the husband who has done the bad thing in Force Majeure, you see how he's really torn up about it. How it's just like struck a fundamental flaw within himself, and you get none of that same anxiety from Will Ferrell. I feel like he just looks like a guy who is worried that his wife is going to yell at him for the majority of this movie.
he feels like he got caught. He was just like, oh, let's rush over. While the other guy is like, please, no, this is a deep-rooted thing. So much so that it spreads to the other couple. Mm-hmm. Here, Zach Woods and his partner, they don't do much other than hashtag. Because hashtags are still funny in 2020 in America. They're not. Yeah. So you miss that whole other aspect of this couple who deals with the other couple and how they're just free range and doing whatever else. They completely destroyed what should have been the friend in the original, who really opens up to the mom who has decided to be a motherly figure for her family. And she's dealing with her friend who's like, oh, I'm a mom too. They're fed at home. Then she's like, that's so weird to me. And you get a really good conversation, not the vagina penis touch is just like handshake.
Right.
What's going on?
You just lose all of the nuance that is.
There is no nuance.
Makes force majeure so interesting. I think when these characters make their upset with each other explicit, they spell out like, how could you have done this to me? There's that like. There's a tension in force majeure from all that they don't say to each other. Like, you can tell that she wants to accuse him, and he wants to say like, this is what you think of me, but because nobody ever gets it, it stays uncomfortable, and that messiness is so delicious. You know, it's fun. That's why we enjoy movies like this, and I feel like the drama ends up just being like an exercise in plot mechanics here. You're just waiting for them to say the lines they're supposed to say so we can get to the next beat of the plot. No more so than in a moment late in the film. And I guess, should we just delve fully into spoilers here? Yes. Because
this is so crucially important, Zach, because I made a video for Force Majeure years ago, and people told me that's not what happens in that scene. So for 5 years later, Zach, to see the Americans come in and be like, can we just get all your director's notes and forget the subtlety you had in the original? We just want to explicitly say it. It's crucial.
Yeah, so the endings of these movies are really interesting. We want to discuss them in some detail.
Please go watch it on Hulu. Go watch the original.
Please go watch the movie. Please go watch Force Majeure at least, and then you can rejoin us. Or you can go check out our Sundance recap for a bunch of other movies that are coming out on the horizon. But if you can't handle the truth, we are going to jump into our downhill spoilers now. Because the scene that I'm talking about, in which they kind of most feel like they're just checking off beats in their plot, is the way that the movie resolves with Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Will Ferrell running up the hill to her. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Please, thank you. Okay, so leading up to it, you have both of these. You have the mom who definitely doesn't know what to do because everything's in shambles. And towards the end of it, she realizes, now my husband is in shambles, because they do a fantastic job in the original of stripping his masculinity. Tormund was his friend who was always finding an excuse for him. So you saw how this guy was always full of it. Mm-hmm. And there's a point where both of the movies do it, where they go skiing, and it's never showcased. It's never said. It's just implied. When the mom doesn't come down the hill, and the dad's able to just, hello? Go up, get her, bring her down, and looks like a hero to his family. Read into it. Look at everything that's happened, and it fixes the family. There's also another scene that happens later on with the bus that's completely omitted in the new one. But in the new one, they decide, no, we got another joke for that. And the way they handle this scene is they come down...
explicitly talking about the scene in which he's supposed to go and save the mother. We actually see Ferrell go up the hill, and they have a conversation. And this conversation was literally my least favorite point of the movie.
Oh my.
It is an explained video. She goes up there, and he goes, all right, listen. This is what we're going to do. In order for the kids don't respect you. I don't really respect you, but for the sake...
It's just spelling out every undertone of the movie.
I was so mad.
It's so frustrating because it's one of those things where, we hear a lot of directors that are like, we have to give the audience the benefit of the doubt.
Don't make them stupid.
But they're smart enough to understand, what's happening. And if they don't, then, watch it again and maybe you'll get it the next time. But this movie just doesn't do that at all. They just tell you straight up, even the way down to how it's shot and like the context of it. In Force Majeure, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Force Majeure, when they go down that hill, first of all, they all go down as a family. Where in this one, Will Ferrell's like, actually, I don't feel like doing it, and she goes down by herself. And then the way it's shot is that there's no one else on the mountain.
It's just dumb,
and it's just snow, like it's fog. You can't see where
in Force Majeure.
in Force Majeure where he's running to. Where in Downhill, there's a bunch of other people. There's people coming down, and the first thing I thought was, would no one help her if she's just like on the floor? And then he's running up like into people coming down, and they're like, get out of the way, because it's also supposed to be funny. And yeah, it's just the way it's shot too is so like,
it makes
boring.
this potentially really complicated drama into a very easy to resolve problem.
That's the problem.
Like it's just, and the other thing being that they take this great 2-hour film and are reducing it to 80-something minutes, so you already know that they're stripping it of all the interesting stuff. And they're basically like, this one scene will wrap a nice bow around everything, and then we can go to the end credits. It's just so lazy. It's such lazy writing.
It ruins the character as well. In the original, when he goes to do it, she's not just doing it for the kids. She's doing it for him. She is putting her ego to the back to fix his mindset, because he went crazy. And in this one, you void all that when Will Ferrell is told, okay, you'll be fine. It doesn't change anything in him, and that's exactly why you got to cut the ending. When he's carrying the kid, when his ego is fixed with the cigarette, because you haven't earned that. You technically have ruined the character. And I think when you add the adultery scene, it doesn't go fully all the way, but now that we're in spoilers, it also detracts, from the character we had in the original to the character that we have in this one. You were talking about the way that it was shot. Great point for the climax scene, but let's talk about the early climax scene, how that was shot as well. The whole downhill bit is done differently, because in the original, it's done from one angle. So much so that, 4.5 years later on Twitter, people thought that was a real thing.
Yeah, dude. It's crazy. And then just the way they frame Will Ferrell getting up and running away was like the goofiest thing ever. And then this is like little like insignificant things, but for some reason that bothered me, where in Force Majeure, when they're getting lunch, right? And they have already ordered their food, and in this one they haven't yet. So when he comes back, he's like, I'll take the soup. And then that's a thing that she brings up later. He's like, he was too busy thinking about the soup. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like why?
Yeah, it's a lazy way. It's retroactively trying to write things in there to make them fit. There's the scene that gets mimicked from the first where somebody comes up and goes, oh, my friend really likes you, and it breaks his ego.
Yeah.
It's a completely different character. Mm-hmm. They redid the punchline without the same setups. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many things about this that just kind of feel like mistranslated or tacked on in a weird way. I know you mentioned in passing there's the whole infidelity bit with Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character. I think that's worth honing in on too.
It is.
Because one of the way, Julia Louis-Dreyfus being the producer behind this remake, I think part of what she was hoping was to give the wife character a little bit more to do, because the husband is clearly the star of Force Majeure. I think we can say that. So in trying to give her more to do, they kind of go into this whole very forced thing with a ski instructor who is just like the most unrelenting ski instructor in the world. If any other ski instructor was told, like, I don't need this lesson right now, they'd go away.
Yeah. He's not a character. He's not a person.
And it's just like creates this whole situation with Julia Louis-Dreyfus where it felt very random to me, decides to kiss this guy, and then has this slight crisis of her own about infidelity. Whereas in Force Majeure, that whole idea of like, are they going to stay together? I feel like it plays as this like bubbling tension under the surface. You see right away her kind of feelings and her regret, and it just makes this so much more uncomplicated.
Yeah. And you're right. What is it with Americans thinking that it's got to be adultery? It's got to be cheating. There's got to be a kiss or something.
Right.
Where the original was like...
It's like this idea that, oh, well, he made a mistake, now she made a mistake, so they're okay or something. Like,
exactly. And it can be actual tension. There's a lot of conversations that are stripped from this new one because they didn't think people would sit with them. And that's what makes the first one so good. How is it that a 2-hour movie gets reduced to 85 minutes, yet that 85 minutes drag more? It's bad. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was not a fan of Downhill. I think it does the characters an injustice, but worst of all, it does the audience an injustice of thinking that they're stupid, of answering questions for them, or creating scenarios from an already perfectly constructed script that really hones in on the masculinity of this man, of what really holds a family together, and really the initial thing. The original title is Tourist for the original film. Translated into force majeure, meaning like a human act, you know, just like when the hill came down. How do you react? And I love that part about the movie, you know. An accident happens. No one knows how they will react until they're there, right? We all say, oh, if my kid's out drowning or if a fire truck falls on him, we're all going to lift it up. But nobody knows until you're in that moment. And that initial moment of like the mother being the mother to cover the kids and, you know, the father dipping because of the phone or whatnot. Again, I really wish if they were going to hone in on the phone then. I know so many full-grown adults who are just so obsessed with their phones. They play a bunch of games on their phones or they're doing work or whatever it is, and they just skirt it and they don't really go for it. And I wish that metaphor would have come in something that could actually be dissected. It doesn't need to be answered for you. The only thing that they leave open for interpretation is the stupid ending, which wouldn't even happen at a ski resort.
Yeah, so they have this moment in place of the bus sequence that ends force majeure, which I think we all love as this kind of interesting turning of the tables moment on the wife and husband, where she kind of assumes the role of panicked one, and it gives you this fun, ambiguous note. They do try to give you a bit of an ambiguous note in Downhill as well, but it's this weirdly simplified version that I don't think has nearly as much to say, in which a bunch of snow slides off the roof, and both the Will Ferrell, Julia Louis-Dreyfus couple, as well as the Zach Woods, Zoe Chow couple, all take a step away from each other. Like, nobody goes in to protect each other, I think is what they were trying to sort of imply, that maybe a braver person or a person who loved someone more would do that. Or, you know, they leave you to think, like, you know, you can't help a very instinctual reaction.
Those are not the same thing.
Yeah.
Fernando.
Yeah, like the force majeure ending is so, it could be condensed. Like that could be like a little short, and it's like so intense because I remember watching it and feeling like the feeling that the mother was feeling, because those roads are insanely narrow. That bus driver was on something.
It's so funny, yeah.
Yeah, and then she's like, stop the bus, and she like gets off first.
But I think that's also a very relatable thing of this, like, you know, sometimes you're not in control of your journey, and how soon are you going to panic, and what are you going to act differently if you have people you're responsible for with you?
And it's interesting that one is a controlled natural avalanche, while the other one is in the hands of somebody else who you don't really know. It's an interesting dynamic there.
Yeah, so the one in the ending in Downhill is just so like ridiculous.
And then there's this. Yeah. It's like ending a Steve Jobs documentary on an Apple and thinking you're profound. You're not. You are not. It would also be cleaned up because you're at a ski resort, you absolute morons. My final thing here is that all the subtleties in the original, there's one that I loved rewatching it with Alina. That was this goofy man literally brought in his family to a place where he has committed adultery because this is a ski resort where everyone cheats. The American version tries to go, well, then they're all hornballs, and it just looks cartoony. And the American version, also has the characters literally mention, there's no kids here, there's no kid, to the point that they even show you
resort down the road.
And it's like, it made me appreciate it so much more in the original when I was like, man, that was such a subtle thing, because eventually he opens up about the other wrong things that he's done, like adultery, and it's like, whoa, adultery, and it adds a really good part to the movie that I've caught 5 years after watching Force Majeure.
Right.
Yeah.
Why the hell did Downhill shove it down my throat first watch?
Yeah.
It's
I
bad.
guess one thing for me that I think that Force Majeure also does way like much better than Downhill, even though it's not the worst thing in Downhill, is the kids, the children characters.
This is good. Yeah, I like them.
I think the one good line in all of Downhill is when the kid is finally like, I hate skiing. It sucks. It's cold. It's hard to go to the bathroom, and I need to go to the bathroom.
Fernando
right
after 3 days at Sundance.
That's Fernando. It sounds like Anakin. It's coarse and it's everywhere.
So that actually made me laugh because I was like, yo, bro, I feel you.
Yeah, I think we all agreed that the one way in which Downhill was able to get maybe a little bit more comedy was through the kids.
Yeah. But even then, I feel like the kid
Skis.
characters in Force Majeure add like this whole other element because they're a lot younger than the ones here.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there's a moment when the dad's crying in the hotel room, and they're like, "Why are you crying? Why are you crying?" And then they all just go and hug him, and then the mom's like, "Yeah." And it's just like because they don't really understand, but they kind of do because earlier in the movie, they get mad at them. I remember the scene when they're on their iPad and they're like, "Come on, let's go," and the kids are screaming at the mom. They're like, "Leave me alone! Like, get out of here!" Where the kids in this, they're just kind of like minding their own thing, and then the mom pulls them out. Did your dad run away from us? Yeah, he
can
ran
we
away.
really quick? What a terrible thing. And I know she apologizes for it later in the movie, and she even has. I know we weren't talking about the helicopter scene, and we won't talk about the helicopter scene. We will not talk about that helicopter scene, okay? But taking the kids out and being like, call out your dad. Oh, don't worry about these two people you've never met. Call out your dad. What a terrible move, and what a different character than the original. What a different character than the original.
Yeah.
Completely.
I think there are a lot of things that ultimately failed about the Downhill remake. And it's a shame, too, because, we don't get a lot of movie performances, in particular from Julia Louis-Dreyfus, who is one of our better comedic presences through her work on Seinfeld and Veep and all her other stuff. It's basically like this and that Nicole Holofcener movie she did a decade ago. I'd like to see...
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see more Julia Louis-Dreyfus in movies, just maybe better movies than this one.
Yeah. Yeah. One day.
Anyway, that's all for this edition of Let Us Explain on Intercut. You can catch more from me, Zach Shevich, by following me on Twitter, Instagram, or Letterboxd @ZShevich, or check out my YouTube channel, youtube.com/multiplexshow. Fernando, where can people find more from you?
You can follow me on Twitter @border_logic, and also my YouTube channel, which is also Border Logic, and watch Force Majeure on Hulu, please.
Art, where can people find more from you?
The A to Z Show and Let Me Explain on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, all that stuff, as well as the Intercut podcast every week here on YouTube.
Yeah, you can listen to every episode of the Intercut podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or your favorite podcatcher. I like Overcast. And then make sure you subscribe not just to the audio feed, but to the video feed as well on youtube.com/intercutpod, where you can catch our bright, smiling faces as we break down the latest in entertainment. Catch new episodes every Friday, as well as these Let Us Explains, which we kind of just drop sporadically. So just watch the channel all the time. And please leave us a comment, like the video, consider heading over to iTunes to give us a 5-star review. Like our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. All of them are @IntercutPod to get updates throughout the week from Art, from me, from Fernando, from all the guests that we feature here on Intercut. Thanks again for tuning in. And until next time, I wonder what I would do if you ever did that to me.
Run. In theaters this Mother's Day.